remains, I realized that there was sort of a discipline that was, since I knew the human remains and the animal remains, and I was applying those to archaeological sites, I hadn't really considered, the forensic aspect, and so I looked into it, and there was sort of a new field that had started in the 70s, which was forensic anthropology. So did a little more research, took some of these short courses like at the Smithsonian and the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, and made some connections there, and then really did some background research and figured that that's a great field to get into. It was sort of wide open. As I studied the field, I realized that it was almost exclusively focused on the bones. So a forensic anthropologist was involved in that time. The police would investigate the scene and collect the remains, take it to the pathologist, maybe take it to the forensic odontologist, the dentist, and try to identify the individuals. And then if there were problems and they didn't have the records, etc., they may then pass it on to an anthropologist to say, maybe it's not a female, maybe it's a male, maybe it's not white, maybe it's black, etc., etc. And so I saw that it was mostly bones, but it wasn't particularly scientific because everything was out of context. Whenever we got these remains, the police may say, as would be expected, how long have they been there? What happened here? Is this a homicide, or is there indications of maybe a suicide? Any details that you can give us would be great, because the police, when they're dealing with an indoor scene, it's not just the body and identification of the individual, it's the whole story of what happened. That's the whole key of what they're going after. And so in the indoor scene, it works spectacularly. Spend a lot of time documenting all the details about the scene, and then ultimately in court, there's a reconstruction of what happened, from the time somebody entered the room to the murder to leaving the room and what happened related to that death event. And so I saw that wasn't being done at the outdoor scene. The police weren't trained on it. There was basically just go to the scene, say, well, it's pretty complicated. We'll just pluck the body and the evidence and put it in a body bag and hope that the forensic pathologist will figure it out, right? So after my training of the residents for a couple hours and looking at some of the cases, I would give talks to other coroners groups, but also to the first one was the state police, and after my talk, somebody came up to me from the state police and said, "Oh, we're going to do a project next week. You want to help out?" And it was one in which the individual, they hadn't found any remains of the individual, but there was a suspicion that this individual had been killed or deposited in this house and then burned down 22 years earlier. They had more information. And when we arrived there, it was just overgrown. And what had happened, the house had been burned down, and ultimately the landowner had filled in the house. And so it was a totally disturbed scene. And so the state police there were interested in recovering the evidence. But what would have happened is they would have brought a bulldozer in and dug it up and would not have found a single thing, because the biggest piece of bone was, an inch or two. So it would have been a case where, they got a lot of good information. Somebody said that the body is sitting in this house here and it burned, and they investigated and found nothing. And so that case would have remained unsolved forever. So just the fact of us coming in, doing forensic archaeology and having someone who can identify bones and fragments of bones and burned bones was very valuable. And so that sort of set the tone for me that there was a place for what we do. Yes. we've sort of the focus of my program and the training of my students has been on that more holistic approach of, you know, the scene, the bones, and then the interpretation of it. So it's a bit different than what other programs will do.
It up on a horizontal 360 degrees, and what I've done is took my compass and I set way out there. The prism is set up. Okay, that's called my backside. So when I line this up and I look through the crosshairs at that prism, this line between there and there is north side back. And I programmed it onto that skeleton that you've created, down to the point that if you look outside, you can see vehicles. I don't think you can see it here, but there's if we were to go around the room, they actually had, based on the crime scene photos, the